Welcome to Intuition on Tap, the podcast where we explore what it means to live, feel, and lead from the soul. I'm your host, Heidi Jane, and today we're diving into a topic that some could consider to be raw, real, and is definitely often unspoken. This is how traumatic childhoods can awaken deep intuitive insights. If you've ever found yourself reading the room before anyone speaks, sensing emotional undercurrents others miss, or being hyper aware of shifts in people's moods, it may not be just sensitivity. It may actually be the survival intelligence you developed as a child, and it could be the very foundation of your intuitive power. Let's talk about it. Last week, we discussed what being an empath means and whether you're just exhausted or whether it was your heightened sensitivity. And while I was recording that podcast, it occurred to me that a lot of these same or similar presentations can also be related to a traumatic childhood. So, not all highly sensitive people have had a traumatic childhood, obviously, but I do sense a correlation between being highly sensitive or an empath and also experiencing a lot of childhood trauma. So let's look at this concept of childhood trauma as a catalyst for intuition. So many of us grew up in emotionally unpredictable or unsafe environments, and we learn to survive by becoming hyper attuned to others. So just imagine if you can put yourself back being a child and whether or not any of these points resonate with you as I go through them. You scanned for tone changes before words were spoken. You sensed when the energy, emotional, physical, psychological energy shifted in the room. And you tracked subtle cues to stay emotionally safe. So this is called hyper-vigilance in psychological terms, and I'm sure you've probably come across that before. But what we don't talk about enough is how this same hyper-attunement can become the root of clairsentience, empathic knowing, and energetic sensitivity. Because as children growing up in traumatic environments, we had to feel everything because we couldn't trust what was said. We had to sense the truth, and that's where often our intuition was born and highly developed. This can also track into our adult relationships, and I want you to take a few moments just to contemplate whether you find yourself surrounded by people in your adult life that you feel aren't telling you the truth. And certainly when somebody's behavior or mood changes slightly, you're hyper attuned to that change. And then your natural impulse is to go in and maybe try and fix it for them. Are you okay? Is there anything wrong? Have I upset you? And certainly if they say, no, there's nothing wrong, you haven't done anything, I'm fine, but your intuition is telling you and your energetic sensitivity is telling you something different. So what they are saying to you versus what you're picking up in the field don't correlate. And so that can sometimes leave us feeling a little bit crazy, and certainly feeling like we question that intuitive insight that we are, I guess, sensing, picking up, certainly in adult environments. So let's look at the difference between trauma hypervigilance and intuitive knowing. Because this is really important because while both can feel the same, they come from different places in the body. And if you've heard any of my teachings before or courses or read any of my books, you know that this is a big thing that I teach about: gut feeling versus intuitive insight, or instinct versus intuition. And they're two very different things. So hypervigilance comes from fear because it's a nervous system response. Think back into, ancient times with our primitive brains, they wanted to keep us safe. So they would respond through our nervous system if they sensed danger. So that saber-toothed tiger hiding in the bushes. Um, the modern brain, even though we still have that primitive aspect of our brain, can't differentiate between the saber-toothed tiger and too many emails or being overworked or being stuck in traffic. So this hypervigilance can also be triggered by the primitive brain, the fight, flight, or freeze response, which again is a nervous system response. So I just wanted you to kind of get that in your mind first. And then when we look at intuition, that comes rather from that inner knowing. And the quality is very different. It tends to be calm, it tends to be grounded, and it tends to be clear. Whereas the hypervigilance response or the instinctive response can be very extreme, and it can be very much accompanied by flooding of neurotransmitters, adrenaline, cortisol, that kind of thing. So you really do feel it physically in your body, where an intuitive knowing tends to feel, like I said, more calm, more grounded, more clear. You just know. So one feels like adrenaline, the other feels like clarity. So, in this episode, I'm going to guide you through how to tell the difference in your own body and how to begin shifting from survival mode sensing into soul aligned knowing, or really connecting with your intuition. So, reclaiming your intuitive gift. Here's the truth: you are not broken, you are intuitive, but your gift was shaped in survival and now it's ready to evolve. So, this is the, I guess, difficulty, challenge that is being presented. How do we reclaim it? Number one, by regulating our nervous system first so we can hear intuition without panic. Now, there's lots of different ways that we can do this: by eating well, resting well, taking care of our energetic hygiene, drinking lots of water, making sure that our physical bodies are in good working order, I guess you could say, doing things like yoga, walking, um, but also not being in a toxic environment where your nervous system is constantly firing. It's very difficult to regulate your nervous system if your nervous system is in constant hypervigilance. So I'd also encourage you to do a bit of a stock take of your relationships, of the people that you live with, of the people that you work with, of maybe your friendship groups, and just kind of mentally track how your nervous system responds to different environments. And of course, if you feel you need to, there's nothing wrong with going and getting some help through counseling, psychological services, therapeutic services, healing, whatever you feel you need to support you to start to re regulate your nervous system. The other point, or the next point, is by reparenting our inner child who once learned to scan for danger. So this phenomenon or this concept is not new. There's a lot of inner child therapists out there, but fundamentally, if you're not aware of it, the concept is that we all have an inner child within us that often, even as adults, can start running the show. So we are responding from that traumatized child rather than the embodied adult. And unfortunately, you don't want a 3, 4, or 5-year-old running your relationships, having control of your bank accounts, that kind of thing, right? It's not a good idea. I don't know if you've hung out with many 3, 4, 5-year-olds, but I do not recommend giving them the keys to your car. So, and that's also the psychological car as well, um, because these inner children that we have, these aspects of ourselves that are wounded and unhealed, can start to run the show. They can also then develop into the inner or the rebellious teenager. And a lot of people, I'm sure you've come across, you can see are responding from their inner rebellious 15-year-olds. And again, these are not people that you want running the show. You want your embodied adult running the show. Unfortunately, if you're dysregulated and either your inner child or your rebellious teenager is in charge, it's very difficult to come from that grounded, intuitive space where you're fully connected. And so, again, I would recommend that, either you go onto my website, intuitionco.com, look at some of my courses, my books, supports, do some hypnosis, or, anyone else that you feel resonant with, just to maybe give you some support around these past traumas that you've experienced. So, by honoring our sensitivity, not as a wound, but as a portal to higher knowing, this is actually how you're going to move through it. So, you don't need to heal away your sensitivity. Okay. This is a really important point. There's nothing wrong with you. Whether you're an empath that was brought up in a non-traumatic environment or an empath that was brought up in a traumatic environment, it's irrelevant. There's nothing wrong with being highly sensitive. It can feel that way sometimes, and certainly if the people around you don't understand anything about heightened sensitivity, although I feel like that has definitely in the last 10 years shifted somewhat in the collective consciousness and the mainstream understanding. Um, but internally, what you need to do is just listen differently. You need to trust differently, and because you feel differently. So what I would recommend, and I know this is really can be very tricky sometimes, and I, excuse me, also find it challenging, is not to compare yourself with other non-sensitive people, because that is just an absolute trap that you're going to fall into. So if you're comparing yourself to these other people, and then you're thinking, well, why can't I do what they do? Why can't I feel like they feel or not feel like they feel? That's a very dangerous pathway to start to go down, because you're never going to get the answer, because you are made differently. I explain this in depth in my book, Empath, The Evolutionary Advantage. So if you want to understand more about that, I highly recommend you grab a copy. So let's just go into a very short, very gentle guided practice. And I just want you to take a moment and close your eyes. Take a couple of deep grounding breaths in through your nose, out through your mouth, and just allow yourself to be very present. As long as you're not driving, I encourage you to close your eyes as long as you're in a safe place. Or you can do this with your eyes open as well. And gently bring your hand up to your heart and rest it there. Just feel connected to your body. And then ask yourself, what am I sensing right now that belongs to me? And then ask yourself, and what am I still carrying that does not belong to me? This could be from yesterday, last week, an hour ago, or decades ago. And as you recognize the difference between the two, you allow yourself to Feel into that. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing to fix. It's just about observation and recognition. Giving yourself gentle permission to let that go now. It's not your job to carry other people's pain for them. It's not your role to fix or to heal anyone other than yourself. And so just gently take a couple of deep breaths as you feel yourself coming back into this space, into the present moment. And then gently opening your eyes. And I'd recommend that you journal anything that came up and what you became aware of. And again, if you feel that this realization was a little bit challenging, certainly reach out to anybody that you can feel supported. So many gifted intuitives, especially empaths and highly sensitive people, were once just children trying to feel safe in unpredictable environments. Like I've said, you've learned to read people, you've learned to read energy, and you've learned to read spaces like a language. And now that language can become your leadership. You can use to your advantage everything that you learned as a child. So we're taking those honed intuitive skills that were formed in potential traumatic environments and using those to apply to your life, to your relationships, to your business, to your jobs, to your spiritual development, to your physical health. Because let's be honest, you know what is right for you. And if you're anything like me, you can sometimes challenge yourself on that. So you know what's the best thing to do for yourself in that moment. And yet that little voice can sometimes chip in and go, oh, yeah, but it'll just be nicer if, you stay home and sit on the couch. So it's in those moments where you can catch yourself and think, no, actually, that's limiting me. Whereas I know intuitively, if I step out of my comfort zone for a moment, that wonderful things can actually happen. You are intuitive. You are worthy, and your story, no matter how painful, it holds magic for you. So thank you for being here today. And if this resonated with you, please do share it with someone else who's reclaiming their power and their sensitivity. And don't forget to subscribe to Intuition on Tap podcast. And if you feel called, please leave a review. Your words do help this podcast reach those who need healing and hope. So until next time, I invite you to stay intuitive, stay tender, and stay true.